Hey, everybody. Welcome. I'm Lee Haber. Until recently, I was the director of Oprah's Book Club and curated the reading room section of O Magazine for many, many, many years. But more importantly, I've been a kind of citizen of book publishing and of reading for my entire life. And so I'm thrilled to be here. I have a little script that I'm supposed to read off of, and I will do that. But I also want to say I am watching the sunset as this happens, as we come alive, all of the book nerds in this virtual room. And it's kind of weird this week because I went to a few events where people were definitely more out and about than they've been in a really long time. And this is my third night wearing a dress. So that's my intro. I've been a participant in, an observer of, and fan of the Buzz panel for many years. It's so exciting to welcome, debut authors. It's been, for many of them, such a lifelong dream, and young, old, in between. And I see on our roster that many of the five among us have day jobs and have probably been working on these manuscripts for a long time with their editors. And so it's really, just an exciting night. It's always thrilling, like opening a present. So on behalf of the American Booksellers Association and Publishers Lunch, welcome to the Buzz Books Editors Panel. Thanks to our editors and publishers for participating in Buzz Books, as well as this panel, and for their generous donation of galleys for 25 booksellers. And be sure to download the free Buzz Books 2023 Fall Winter Sampler with excerpts of these five authors, as well as many others. We'll post that link in the chat throughout the evening. And now let's introduce our first panelists. Okay, first of all, what I want to say about Coleman Hill and its author, Kim Coleman Foote, is that I want to know more about why the subtitle is biomythography. And what I'm gathering from that is that this is in part a fictionalized portrait of her family going way back, the Great Migration, back to, I think, 1916 in the book. And I was just like stunned by this language. And I think it's the first entry in Sarah Jessica Parker's new imprint with Zando. But as importantly to me, Kim is apparently also a native New Jerseyan. She lived for some time in Vauxhall, New Jersey, which is the next town over from mine. So congratulations, Kim, on this incredible debut. And I also want to introduce Erin Wicks, who is her editor at Zando, and who also published one of my favorite books of recent memory, that is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, when she was at HarperCollins. So without further ado, let me bring these ladies to the stage and welcome them. Hi, guys.
Thank you so much, Lee. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee.
Really fun to see you, and congratulations. And now I'm going to step off until our next guest. And please be sure to tell us what you mean by biomythography.
Don't
Sure.
Enjoy the conversation.
And just a little disclaimer, I am not from Vauxhall. My family is. I grew up in Essex County, New Jersey, but I do feel like I'm from Vauxhall.
Okay, point taken. Thank you. We'll welcome you anyway.
So to tell you all a little bit about Coleman Hill, it is the story of two formidable matriarchs who migrate north in the early years of the Great Migration. Over the next 7 decades, we come to see their family lives unfurl through the eyes of different family members across 3 generations. Kim's kaleidoscopic storytelling examines inheritance, how our cultural, historical, sociological, and familial legacies play out across time in ways both inevitable and shocking. I first encountered Kim's writing in a literary magazine nearly a decade ago and proceeded to hunt her down to hear her read and meet her. So it was a surprise and a delight when her novel landed in my inbox. I was completely engrossed by the Coleman and the Grimes families, as was Sarah Jessica Parker, who is thrilled to be publishing this as the second book on her imprint, SJP Lit at Zando, and who has called it immersive and extraordinary. So Kim, my first question for you is, how did this book come to you?
So it really started back in the 80s when I was a kid growing up here in Jersey. And I would sit around listening to my mother and her siblings and cousins talk about their lives, their childhood in the 40s. Excuse me. And it just fascinated me because they talked about things like ice boxes and radio shows, so different from my upbringing. But then they also talked about the abuse that they suffered at the hands of their grandmother, who's on the Coleman side. And I was really stumped when they would laugh sometimes about the abuse. I said, how could you laugh about something like that? And then also they would turn around and say, I wonder why such and such is like that today. And I'd be like, are you kidding me? Of course, such and such is like that because they were beaten when they were a kid. So I had wanted to write about my family and those connections for a long time, in some form, but I felt like I needed some type of spiritual permission because I'd be exposing a lot of trauma and secrets in my family. And then years later, during my MFA program, I was given an assignment for a class to write a story based off of a photograph. And I chose one of my grandfather's 3 sisters as little girls. And the one in the middle, she was always known as evil in all the stories that I heard growing up. And I figured, yes, that's correct, because even as a little girl, she's looking evil. She's clutching this dog, practically strangling this dog. You know, she looks at you like she wants to cut you already at, that's such a young age. And her 2 sisters in the photograph just look terrified. And so then this voice of the evil one just pops into my head. I ain't afraid of that man or his camera. And the words just kept pouring. I never write like that. When I write, I always see movies in my head. I never hear words. And so I rushed to grab a notebook and pen, and I wrote down her words within minutes. And I finished a whole narrative within a couple of minutes. And this is someone in my family who, she became an alcoholic. She had a really nasty personality from anyone who cared to talk about her. That's all they would mention about her. And her kids ended up going into foster care because she could no longer take care of them because she would go off on drinking binges. But by the time I finished writing those words, she was no longer evil to me.
That's so beautiful, and that makes so much sense. So how did the book evolve from there? What were kind of your next steps into finding what becomes really an unusual form, but an epic?
Yeah, so I tried to replicate that experiment using other family photographs. I've done genealogical research on my family for years. That's my hobby. That was the unintentional research behind the book. And so I collected all these photographs from various family members who were, getting older. They no longer wanted them. But where I didn't have photos, I had really great anecdotes from my family. And so, for example, one of the earliest stories that I wrote after that first one was inspired by just a few snippets of information that I had on my Grimes side. So my great-grandfather, for example, he died of lockjaw. And that as a disease, one of these old, obviously tetanus is still around, but as this old term for this disease, it just terrified me to thought that someone could die with their mouth being clamped shut. And also I had learned about his mother, who basically goaded a white man in segregated Alabama in the early 1900s. This white man put a rifle on her face and she told him to pull the trigger, and she lived to talk about it. And so, there were scanty details on that side of my family, but I basically brought all these details together and built a narrative around it. And one of the other earliest stories that came out was also based on a photograph. And it's about an anecdote that my mother gave me about how she and her siblings and cousins sat around one day plotting to kill their grandmother.
Oh, that is one of my favorite stories in the book. There's so many layers to it. It's really brilliantly done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, why, I guess would be my next question. Why did you want to write the book? That, the voices were coming to you, but were there other intentions that you had in having this as your debut?
Yeah, like I said, I'd always wanted to write about my family, and there's just so many fascinating stories that I heard like that growing up. But I also wanted to center the women's voices. I write a lot about women's stories and these kind of forgotten stories. And through my research, I had discovered that both my great-grandmothers on the Coleman and Grimes side, they came up from Alabama and Florida, respectively, to Vauxhall. And their husbands died within a few years of coming up, and both had about 5 kids each. They were domestics, just like they'd been in the South, and both went on to own their own homes, which was a rarity in my family. And I would always think, like, what was their life like? How did they manage to achieve that, being these young single women with all these kids, and this new place, was better in a lot of ways than the South. So that was kind of my initial impulse. And then also during my research, I got to go down to Alabama and meet some of my Grimes kin who'd never left the South. And I learned very quickly that they actually were able to advance further than my family who went north in terms of education and also home ownership. And I said, well, how is that? And then I realized that the North had shortchanged my family and other Black families as well in some ways. And so with all that information, I started to see a narrative developing, but it wasn't really until I read Elizabeth Strout's Olive Kitteridge that I saw the possibilities of an actual book, because before it was just like these kind of disjointed narratives that were interesting, right? And in the book, I think Olive gets 1 or 2 of the narratives are written from her perspective, but you feel her presence everywhere, through the other characters. And she's kind of like a black hole that sucks in all of the light around her. And I think, if you had read a whole book with Olive's perspective, she's so curmudgeon-y, she's so intense that you probably would just like get so tired of her and throw the book across the room. And so I saw my great-grandmother Coleman, she was kind of serving that same function, in terms of the other characters who were inspired by my family members. She was serving that same role, revolving around everything. So once I figured out that she was the center, the narrative started taking shape, and I started to use some of these anecdotes with intention. Yes.
As you're talking about it, I think, some people would call what you're doing here autofiction. That's a very, popular term. But as Lee mentioned, there's another term that I know you love to call it that I'll let you kind of share with everyone, and the, incredible origins of that word as well, and why that term speaks to you and speaks to the way you conceptualized of this novel.
Yeah, so the term is biomythography, and this was invented by the writer Audre Lorde for her memoir Zami. And I first encountered this also in my MFA program. And before I read it, I was thinking, oh my God, what is this? Is it going to be this really experimental, speculative sci-fi, something weird happening in this book? And it just read like a realistic memoir, nothing strange happened. But then I looked at how she defined it, and she basically calls it a work of literature that combines many sources to create a modern myth, a new history. And when I was writing Coleman Hill, I was like, well, I didn't know exactly what to call it, because I was just thinking, like, especially with what I've read contemporarily, like, I didn't really have examples of people doing anything like this. But then I was like, oh, yes, of course, Alex Haley did this with Roots, or something similar with Roots. But he called his process faction, which, fiction plus fact. I just didn't really like the sound of that. I like the sound of biomythography a lot better. But also, I realized that I was doing exactly what Lorde mentioned. I was combining the oral histories from my family, the years of document research that I'd done with census records, birth records, all kinds of government and other records, the photographs, and also my imagination to kind of combine them into this big soup and make this narrative. So I really felt that biomythography fit.
No, I completely agree. And I've loved learning and unpacking that term with you through the course of working on the book together. It's been really special and really exciting. I think something else that has always really spoken to me about the book is that it is told from so many different perspectives. We have so many different voices, and we're hearing from people when they're children, and then again at adults. And in the meantime, we're seeing them through other people's eyes. And it's fascinating. And what is your kind of intention behind that? What do you hope that the impact of us experiencing the book in that way will be?
Well, first of all, I'm the believer that there is not one story, there's not one truth. And, the truth is very muddy in this book, like it is in any family. You ask 2 siblings about an event that happened the day before, and they're experiencing it different ways and with different emotions, right? And so to look at a whole family, this is really two families with lots of family members. And to have all those dynamics together, you're going to get a gazillion different perspectives. And at some point, I realized that I was representing most of the main characters as children. And I felt that that had to happen just to really see, because originally I wanted to know also why these adults were like they were, why some of them, behave badly towards each other, hurt each other. And so I had to really go back into their childhood to see where that came from, because I don't think now, maybe as a kid listening to these stories, I could accept that, oh yeah, this person is evil. But I don't think people start off as evil or whatever stereotypes or judgments that we put on them. And so I wanted to see the traumas that might have happened to them in their childhood to lead them to become the adults that they did. So for example, the character inspired by my great grandmother Coleman, she, as a young girl, she witnesses the brutal murder of both her brother and another Black man, and, in the segregated South. And if she had not witnessed those events, would she have turned out to be this adult who's completely overprotective of her son, so much to the extent that she kicks out his wife. She kicks his wife out of the house, the character inspired by my grandmother, who I'm calling Bertha, and separates her from her children as well. And also with the character Bertha, for example, she's someone who loves the silver screen. She's in love with love and movies and Hollywood, and basically the character inspired by my grandfather evokes these feelings in her as a young girl. And so she thinks this is love, he's meant for me. And then when he starts to abuse her physically, that she just accepts it because, well, but he loves me, right? Because I feel this way about him. Her sister, on the other hand, doesn't buy that. She sees the abuse that Bertha experiences when she's a child herself. And she actually declares that she's never going to get married, which is highly unusual in a time when obviously women are expected to marry and have kids.
No, absolutely. I think we are out of time, but thank you so much, Kim, for talking to me always about your incredible, incredible novel, and turn it back to Lee.
Thank you.
Hey guys, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. You did satisfy my curiosity about your subtitle beautifully. And I think I saw in the chat that some people are saying that this sounds like a great book club discussion, subject. And I think they're right. I also love your shout out to Olive Kittredge, by the way. So thank you. And moving on to our next panelists. And they are Anise Vance, who is a writer from the African and Iranian diasporas and holds an MFA in creative writing from Rutgers University in Camden. He is a Mitchell Scholar who received an MPhil in geography from Queen's University in Belfast and a graduate of Dartmouth. He lives in North Carolina with his wife and 2 children. But most importantly for this group, Hush Harbor is his debut novel. And it too, as Kim's book does, is informed by intergenerational trauma, very important theme in Hush Harbor, as well as in Kim's book that we were just talking about. And I watched a TED Talk that Anise delivered. I think it was when he was still at Dartmouth. And it was on the legacy of trauma, storytelling, and so on, and really, really interesting and profound, and clearly informs this novel. And welcome to John Glynn as well, who is his editor, an executive editor at Hanover Square Press, and also an author in his own right. So without further ado, please join the remote stage, and welcome to you both.
Hi, everyone. My video is not working. I'm hoping that it can be unlocked, but regardless, I am so happy to be here. Lee, thank you so much.
Oh, John, that's just a convenient, no one wants to be on video.
I know. It's telling me that it's you cannot start video. The host has stopped it. So
it's okay. We'll forgive you this time, but next time we want to see you in person. Okay, enjoy the conversation.
Well, let's dive right in here. So Hush Harbor, it's one of those rare debuts where it's just sort of firing on all cylinders. It's a novel of ideas. It has immersive world building. It's literary fiction. But I think my video's on. Yes. Okay. Amazing. Hi, everyone. As I was saying, Hush Harbor is one of those books that's just firing on all cylinders. It's literary fiction, but it actually has a heart-pounding plot. But I keep coming back in my mind when I think about this book to June 2020. We were 3 months into the pandemic. Trump was president, and George Floyd's murder, along with the murder of so many other innocent Black people at the hands of the police, really sort of galvanized a lot of protests across the country. And if you were in New York City at the time, there was this palpable energy in the air, this like collective desire to tear down and reinvent a system that had failed so many. And for me as a reader, that was my way into Hush Harbor when it came to me on submission. I stepped back into that collective emotional space, that like collective activation that was happening. And I'm dying to hear from you, Anise. What was your entry point here? Like, where did the idea come from? And maybe you can tell us all what the book is about too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, John, I'm so happy that we got your video on and so happy to see your face. And thank you, everyone, for having me here. This is such an honor, and I'm so excited about all of the books on this panel. I feel like I have my fall and winter reading list already, so this is really exciting. I did, as Lee mentioned, I did part of my graduate studies in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And if you know anything about Belfast, you know it experienced decades of violence, known in a really understated way as the Troubles. And I was there to study conflict and post-conflict settings. And a big part of that was interviewing people who had been involved. And so I remember going to this one interview where Belfast streets are really, really narrow and the houses and all the buildings are super, super small. And I went up the stairs in the building that I was supposed to go at, and it was really, really cramped. Someone escorted me up the stairs and escorted me into a room and opened the room. And there was a gentleman there sitting against the window, stocky guy with short cropped hair. And he was introduced as the leader of the local paramilitary in that neighborhood, which still exists and they still function to some level in Belfast. And so we get into the interview, and as we're talking, I gradually realized two things at pretty much the same time. The first is that I know who this person is, that he's actually relatively famous and that he was involved in some things that you could sort of, again, in an understated way, say were pretty rough. The second thing that I realize is that, my God, I'm starting to like this person. And I gotta tell you, when I talk about great storytellers, this was one of the greatest storytellers I've ever been around. And he had this way of sort of looking off into space, and his eyes would get all, a little bit soft and vulnerable. And then he'd look back at you and he'd say your name. He'd say, Anise, I got to tell you, in his Irish accent. And he'd say it in such a way that made you feel like you were the only person in the world who understood what he was going through. And in that moment, I started to question myself, and I started to think, well, how easy is it to slip into this pattern of violence and into causes that maybe you had never thought that you were going to be a part of. And from that point, this idea of what a revolution in the United States might look like, might feel like, really sort of took root. I didn't actually act on the idea unless in case anyone thought I was wise or clever, I was none of those things. And I didn't act on the idea for another 3 years. And in 2014, Eric Garner was murdered, followed by Michael Brown, followed by Tamir Rice, really in short order in the last 6 months of 2014. And I didn't know where to put that pain. I didn't know where to put that grief. And I thought about this book and started to write it again. It was a total mess. And at the same time that I was starting to write this, my best friend, someone who I consider a brother, his method of dealing with that pain and grief was to go to Ferguson. And he was part of the protest there. And every time I would talk to him, I would hear the strain in his voice, and I would hear the pain, and I would hear all the conflict that the internal conflict that he was experiencing, as well as the standoffs with police. And all of a sudden, that started to come into the writing, and I had my first character there. And so the first character you meet in the book is my best friend, is my brother. And so that's really kind of where it came from.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about the characters here too. So you write from five different points of view, and you so sort of adroitly inhabit these characters. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it was like to embody these different perspectives, but also sort of how do they coexist together on the canvas? What's our setup for the story?
Absolutely. So the first character you meet is a character who's going into the world of Hush Harbor. And Hush Harbor essentially is a barricaded off portion of a fictional New Jersey city. New Jersey's coming up a lot in today's panel, a fictional New Jersey city called Bliss. And part of that has been barricaded off. And it's this resistance movement, an active resistance movement that is armed, that emerges in response to the killing of a Black teenager. And so the first character you meet is someone who's been recruited into that movement, and you see him going into the movement, and you see him develop inside of the movement. Then you get other characters that have been there a little bit longer. Zara is the second character you meet, and she is on a different sort of part of her journey than the first character Malik is, and you see her wrestle with seeing things that she actually doesn't really love, even though she's so committed to the mission that the movement has set out for itself, which is to get justice for this Black teenager who was murdered. The next characters you meet, the next character you meet actually set outside of that particular world, but is a confidant to the mayor of Bliss, and she's a white ally, or considers herself a white ally, but now has to wrestle with all these notions of what allyship means when there are folks who are demanding a certain level of justice that she might believe in, but her work and her job places her in a different position in relation to them. So she goes through that struggle. The final two characters you meet, Jeremiah and Nova Prince, obviously they're there throughout the whole book, but whose POVs are inhabited, are brother and sister, and they're the two leaders of the movement. And they come to the movement, with incredible intelligence, incredible courage, incredible gravitas, and are also people who are questioning what this pursuit of justice is doing to them. There's John, you and I have talked about this. There's sort of like a playlist of songs that came along with the book. And maybe the most important songs in that are Sinnerman by Nina Simone and Monster by Jacob Banks. And both of those wrestle with this issue of, what is the world doing to me? And what am I becoming as a result of that? And what choice and agency do I have in that? So Jeremiah and Nova really, really wrestle with that as around them, the actions of white supremacists and the actions of the government become more and more aggressive in terms of dismantling Hush Harbor. And so they have to live in that political powder keg, but are trying to do it in a way that I can only describe as maybe more spiritual. They're trying to reach for some attributes and some values that perhaps are not purely political.
So the book is sort of building towards a standoff between this resistance group that's formed this movement in Hush Harbor and this group, the originists. Let's talk about the Hush Harbor group. So that's what they name this community, and it's of course the title of the book, but it lends sort of a historic heft to the story, and it works on multiple levels. How did you land on the title?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a moment of serendipity. I had known what Hush Harbors were, and for those on the call who might not know what those are secret spaces that enslaved people would gather and meet to pray and to worship in their own tongues, and with a sense of freedom and liberation, one would imagine. And so, and by their very nature, they were spaces of subversion and of resistance, because that kind of gathering would have been uniformly prohibited during the slavery period. So when Nova and Jeremiah and the group that founds Hush Harbor is thinking of a name, they're thinking outside of names that, you know, are about alliances or associations or, you know, collectives or things like this. They're thinking about the kind of value and the kind of spirit that they want to inculcate in that space, because part of the act of resistance to them is also an act of creation. And so they're gesturing towards the kind of creation they want, the kind of sanctuary, the kind of safe environment that they want to create for their community.
It's really cool. And it sort of speaks to these two forces that I see at work within this novel as a piece of art. And that is the sort of real life discourse that informs it, but also this sort of mythic register that you're operating in, and a lot of the ideas and themes feel timeless. And I'm sort of wondering, just like, how is a writer, it's really a high wire act, like how did you sort of balance those two to create a book that feels in a lot of ways timeless but also timely?
You know, that's a really great question. I wish I had a good answer to it, John, I'll be honest. And I'm going to say something that might sound super silly, but sort of a mantra that I kept repeating in my head as I was writing the book. And I'll explain what it sort of meant to me was right to the bone. And so in the book, you'll note that there's a lot of physical description, right? It's a lot of the characters' bodies and movements and gestures and emotions. There's not a lot of exposition in the book. And what that sort of allowed me to do was inhabit the characters. But also, once I started doing that, it wasn't just writing to the bone of the characters. It was that the bones of certain really profound, in my mind, profound ideas started to sort of just reveal themselves without me having to do anything. So this became a book that was very specific, but was also wrestling with these what I think are sort of timeless issues about how we resist oppressive forces, about how we love each other, about how we grieve, about how we come together. All of these questions that I think are at the root of our societies and the root of our structures. And these characters are on a daily and in a very, very heightened, tense environment wrestling with. And so that was kind of my mantra, right to the bone, right to the bone, right to the bone. And then, you know, I'd listen to Sinnerman and I'd listen to that middle section where the piano comes in, when it's just the snare, you know, and then the piano comes in and you start to feel this momentum and you're like, oh, that's what I want this to feel like. I want this to feel like when Nina Simone, right at the end, you know, the claps come and then the piano, and then Nina Simone says, oh yeah. And you're just kind of like, you're like, oh, I don't know where we're going with this, but I'm here for it. That was sort of the feeling that I wanted folks to take away.
I mean, as you were describing that, I could see the trailer for the movie of this, and you write in such a cinematic way. I think we have time for like one more question. I want to know, like, you you have two really young children. What's your writing routine look like? How did you manage to juggle all of this? Because it's always really impressive to me.
Oh, well, thank you. That's really, I appreciate that. The writing routine is pretty stringent, I will say, especially when I was in the thick of it, where it was every morning at 5 a.m. And no matter what happened the previous night, I got really serious about Hush Harbor and about writing it when we actually had our first child, our son, who's 6 years old now, because it felt to me like it was now or never, and I needed to sort of make that sacrifice. And so regardless of if we had been up all night, how many diapers we have changed, how many times, you know, the kids had woken up, how tired I was, I needed to go to the computer and write and get something on the page that ended up with a lot of really bad writing, and then also some things that were worth keeping, and is just it has become one of my favorite moments of the day, this sort of beautiful moment where you get to sit there with the computer. That said, waking up into Hush Harbor every day for 6 years, it takes a psychological toll. It takes a pound of flesh.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much. And back to you, Lee.
Thanks, John.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating, especially the tidbit about the Hush Harbor and the origins of it and so on. And it is a really, really compelling read that you can think about as, you know, speculative fiction, but also very timely, current, could be happening right now. So thanks to you both. And as we're running a little bit low on time, let's quickly welcome Anna Bliss. She is the author of another debut novel called Bonfire Night. And the thread between Anise and Anna, I was just noticing, Anise was talking about Belfast and so on. And one of Anna's main characters is the sort of Juliet, the Juliet in the scenario is an Irish Catholic who during World War II is in love with a man who's Jewish. And so that's at the center of this wonderful novel. And she on Amazon by one contributor has been compared to Ian McEwan and Graham Swift. So, congratulations for that wonderful comp. And then her editor, his name is also John, and I hope I don't mangle this. John Scognamiglio is the editor-in-chief of Kensington. Anna, first of all, is graduate of UC Santa Barbara and the University of Sussex, where she wrote her dissertation on women's narratives of the London Blitz during World War II, and clearly that came into play. And John is editor-in-chief, as I mentioned, of Kensington Publishing, which he joined in 1992 and started an imprint named after him, focused on commercial fiction, high quality commercial fiction. So without further ado, I will ask these two delightful people to come to the stage and hear their stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. So Anna, it is so great to be here with you tonight. One of the favorite parts of my job is talking to my authors about their books. And I love your book, Bonfire Night. As Lee mentioned, it is a story about an interfaith relationship between Kate, who's a photographer, and David, who's a medical student. They meet in 1936 at an anti-fascist protest. And of course, the problem is she's Irish Catholic, he's Jewish. But with the book, you didn't take a love conquers all approach. I mean, you examined the complexities and challenges of an interfaith relationship. What made you want to explore that?
Well, there are a lot of things about their story that are personal to me. Even though it's not my story, I converted to Judaism before I married my husband. I come from a long line of very religious Irish Catholic women. And so I definitely related to that part of the story. The big difference is that my husband and I met in 2005 and David and Kate met in 1936, which was a completely different world in terms of interfaith relationships. When I was researching this book, I spoke to a lot of British Jewish and American Jewish people who were alive before the war. And every one of them said almost verbatim, I would never have married out, meaning married a non-Jewish person because I loved my family, because I respected my family. It just wasn't done. And so that helped me a lot when I was researching the story, because I felt like, okay, yeah, I'm onto something here. In that for David, falling in love with a woman who wasn't Jewish was really a kind of a personal catastrophe. And so now today, obviously, interfaith marriages, interfaith relationships are very, very common. But I think that readers will connect with that conflict between, personal desire and what is seen as best for the group. And so I'm hoping that will sort of spark in people's personal experience while they're reading this.
In the novel, Kate is her passion is photography. She wants to be a photojournalist. She's working on Fleet Street. That was probably a very challenging time for a female photographer. I mean, you do a really great job writing about this world that she's a part of. I mean, she's like the only female photographer, and she's working in this all-male office. What was the thinking behind making her a photographer?
Well, it comes out of a personal passion of mine. When I was in college, I worked for a newspaper, and I spent a lot of time working in the darkroom and doing black and white photography. But Kate's really not fully based on, but let's say inspired by a photographer named Lee Miller, who was an American photographer working in Britain and Europe during World War II. So I first encountered her when I was in graduate school in England. I was writing my dissertation, as Lee Haber said, on women artists working in England during the Blitz, which was when Germany was bombing London directly. That went on for many years, and often for months, every single night in a row. So I was really focusing a lot on women writers like Elizabeth Bowen, Barbara Commons, Muriel Spark. But I was also looking at photographers and artists. And one photographer that just kept coming up was Lee Miller, because she took these amazing surrealist photographs of London when it was being bombed. And then I found out that her family home and archive was not far from where I lived in Brighton. And so I traveled there, and I had the opportunity to meet her son, Tony, and he's also her principal archivist. And he gave me access to her negatives, her correspondence, all of her, if any of you out there have done film photography, all of these just boxes of contact sheets. And so I got to follow her journey in a really, in a way that felt really intimate and unusual. And she went on to, after taking photos in London during the bombing, she actually traveled with troops in Europe during and immediately after World War II. And she's probably best known for forcing Vogue to publish photographs of concentration camps as they were being liberated. And they're very, very disturbing photos. Not the sort of thing that you would normally see in a fashion magazine, but she did it because the people she spoke to around the camps all said to her, we didn't know what was going on in there. Nothing was going on in there. And it became her personal mission to show the world what had happened, because she knew that if people who were living next door to a concentration camp could deny it, then the world would deny it. This experience took a very heavy toll on her personal life, and that she carried that trauma and darkness with her for the rest of her life. Her son didn't even know she was a photographer until she was close to the end of her life in the 1970s. So all this to say that Lee Miller really she always sort of stayed with me. I didn't start writing this book until some years after I left England, but she's been with me since then. And I think that's why I put so much of her into Kate, because she just is a very inspiring artist for me.
Well, speaking of Kate, she loves her job, but I couldn't help but notice that there were parallels to what still is going on today. Like, she's working in a man's world, and she's pretty much every day she goes to that office, she's being sexually harassed. I mean, it gets to the point where her boss tries to rape her. And was that your intention when you were writing the book, to have these parallels to, like, things change, things don't change, they stay the same?
Well, yes, in that I think that some of the experiences Kate has in the workplace are unfortunately universal experiences, hopefully not all of them. But I think that most women will tell you that they've felt some sort of tension or difficulty in the workplace at some point in their life, just for the sake of being women. So to be honest, part of why I wrote that is because I've had experiences like that in the workplace, and I knew I could write those scenes from a very visceral place, and in a way that was true. And so I think some of those scenes just came out of that. And then they sort of work their way into the story in a way that felt right to me.
And they were very real. I mean, Kate's a wonderful character, but those scenes were they were very scary. Like, I'm turning the pages and I'm like, she's going to get out of this. I know she's going to get out of this, but at the back of my mind, I'm wondering, well, is she? But well, don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah.
So the book starts in 1936, ends in 1945. What I loved about this book when it came into me from your agent was that, I edit a lot of World War II fiction, and a lot of World War II fiction is being published, but a lot of the World War II fiction that's out there today, it's all about soldiers and spies and prisoners of war, and there's this whole espionage fighting element. But your book is different in that it's about everyday people going about their lives in the midst of World War II. And why did you decide to take your story in that direction? Because I do remember at one point, as I was getting back reads on the manuscript, your agent came to me and said, oh, there's an editor at another house that likes the book, but they want some changes, like they want a spy element in the story. And she had sent me a little outline where you had made some suggestions about how you could take the story in a different direction. And I read that little outline and I was like, no, I don't want the author to do this. I love this book as is.
Thank you. I mean, one of the reasons I've loved working with you, John, is because I feel like we've been remarkably on the same page in terms of how we see the story and how we want it to go. But yeah, I definitely got that feedback in the process of selling this book from many editors who said things along the lines of, we want to see a woman who is in mortal danger from the jump. And that those stories are interesting and they are compelling. But what I intended when I sat down to write this story, and I'm happy that I did it, was to tell the stories of ordinary people, because most of us, we're not spies. Hopefully we're not, being stalked in the night and in mortal danger, but we are living through difficult times, not to compare the times we live in with World War II, but we have all just lived through a multi-year global pandemic where life has been very uncertain and not guaranteed, and so I think that I wanted to really dig into that, and I'm really curious and continue to be curious about how people manage to make their lives beautiful and meaningful in really difficult conditions, which David and Kate were most definitely living through. I started this book, Anise, I related to so many things you were saying. One of them is that I started writing this book when I was 8 months pregnant with my second child, and he's now 6 years old. And I didn't know that what was going to happen was going to happen. It was a month before the first Trump election, and I was driving in my car and I heard a story about something called the Battle of Cable Street, which was this historic anti-fascist protest in London in 1936, where hundreds of thousands of people came together and blocked an anti-Semitic parade through the most Jewish neighborhood in London, if not in England. And those the people, the two main groups that were involved in it were Irish immigrants and Jewish immigrants. And I think because of my own history and my own relationship, I thought there might be a story in that. And I think that I wanted to show just what it might be like living under the threat of an authoritarian leader. And I think because at the time in 2016, I thought that there was no way that we would ever have a president like that. Obviously, I was naive, but I remember thinking specifically in October of 2016, I need to write some of this before he loses the election, so I can kind of get the fear in there. Obviously, he did win, and so the events that transpired after that helped me with the story, as did living through the pandemic, taking care of, being a mother of small children in the pandemic, and also where I live in Northern California, in a place that's not far from where there were a huge amount of wildfires in 2020. And so not only were we trapped inside because of the pandemic, there were many days when the sun didn't come up at all because the sky was just full of smoke, and it was kind of like living on Mars. And so I think that ordinary people, I think ordinary people's lives are very interesting, and I don't think they necessarily have to be spies or famous figures from history for it to be compelling.
Well said, well said. Well, this was great. Back to you, Lee.
Hi again, everybody, and that really was great. Anna, what a compelling story. And it's interesting the way you brought in present day politics and so on to it, and Me Too. And John, thank you for that great conversation. All right, so we have two more guests, or four more guests, two more books to talk about. And the next one, I find no real through thread from the previous discussion to this one, but maybe Nishita will be able to point one out. Her book, The Night of the Storm, also a debut, is what's been billed as a hurricane thriller. And what I love about this is that I'm dying to know if there was some fact in this piece of fiction, because in this book, a family is kind of trapped together during this cataclysmic storm, and all kinds of things go awry. And I just, I'd like to know a little bit more about Nishita's family. Anyway, this is a hurricane in Texas. Her editor, Lindsay, will be able to pry some of those facts out of her. But without further ado, I'll just give a little bit more, put a little bit more meat on the bone. Nishita was born and raised in Mumbai, now lives in Texas. She is a software programmer by day. And she loves writing about her experiences as a woman and an immigrant. And she's an active member of the International Thrillers Writers, Crime Writers of Color, and so on. Lindsay is her editor, and she is an executive editor at Dutton. So without extending this beyond what I just said, let's bring our next two guests to the stage with a warm welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank
I
you,
think
Lee, for that.
my video needs to be unlocked, sorry.
All right, well, they're working on that. I will start us off, and thank you everyone for having us. And Nishita, I'm really happy to be here with you, and I hope that everyone can also see you really soon. But in the meantime, maybe I'll just set the stage and talk a little bit about what the book is about. So as Lee said, it is a locked room thriller set in Houston, Texas. Oh, there's Nishita. Yay, we can see you now.
Awesome.
So it's a locked room thriller set in Houston, Texas, and it takes place during Hurricane Harvey, which is the hurricane part of the hurricane thriller. And it follows a big multi-generational Indian American family as they gather together to try to ride out the storm. And of course, since it's a thriller, then someone dies, and soon we realize that there's a murderer in the house with them. But of course, the whole city is shut down because of the hurricane, so there's no hope of any help. The police can't make it out there, and they realize that no one is coming to their rescue until the storm ends. So that's the book in a nutshell. But before I pass it over to Nishita for our first question, I also wanted to give you all just a little sense of some of the amazing early reader response we've been getting for Nishita's book by just very briefly reading one of our early blurbs, which is from Abby Jarre. And she says, "This dazzling and multi-layered thriller has everything. A brilliantly twisty plot laced with intelligent social commentary, a stormy and claustrophobic setting, and characters who leap off of the page and into your heart. It's a thoughtful story of sisterhood, the ups and downs of single parenting, and the complexities of starting fresh in a new place. And at the same time, a wildly entertaining thriller filled with secrets and mayhem that will keep you guessing until the final page. So, Nishita, you live in Houston, and you were there during Hurricane Harvey. So in many ways, this is a book that only you could write. Can you tell us what it was like to be there during the hurricane and to live through that?
Yeah, so in 2017, when Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, I was pretty much stuck in my apartment because the building was flooding. Luckily, I was on the second story, so I was safe, but some people had to leave. And I happened to have a lot of family members living nearby who basically needed a place to ride out the storm. So they ended up crashing at my place. And one of my cousins was actually rescued in a boat along with her family, which at the time was like so surreal to me, because at the time I had just moved from New York. It had been a few years since I'd moved from New York. And I was not used to the idea of, boats and flooded streets, flooded suburban streets. So it was all just, a very new experience to me. So we were 5 adults and 2 kids crammed in this tiny 1-bedroom space. The kids were bored out of their minds, so we had to find ways to entertain them. We could hear rescue choppers flying overhead. All in all, it was just a crazy time. But we ended up having a good time. Nobody was murdered. This is a work of fiction for sure, because thank God my family, I love them. They are nothing like the awful characters in the book. So definitely it's not based on my real family, but the experience gave me this idea of having a thriller set during a hurricane. And right away, I knew that I had landed on a killer premise, pun intended, because this hurricane stresses these characters out because they're afraid, like, is the house going to flood any minute? At the same time, they are literally trapped inside with each other. They have nowhere to go. So they have no choice but to deal with all the family drama and all the damaging secrets that come out over the course of the night. And the book does have a fair amount of drama, because I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that if you spend too much time with your family, bad things happen.
Yes, that is really true. That is such an incredible story, Nishita. I am so glad that you made it through okay, and that your real life was nothing like what actually happens in the book. But it makes for a great book, so that's wonderful. And I have to add that that's actually one of the things that first really pulled me into this book, is the whole idea of a thriller set during a hurricane. Because as a reader, one of my favorite things is books set during a storm. And as I started reading your book, for me, one of the first things that really stood out to me was that great stormy atmosphere. From the very first pages, the rain is coming down and it's starting to flood, and there's this sort of wonderfully tense ticking clock that starts happening, because we see that the city is starting to flood, and we're wondering, okay, is the flood going to make it to the house, which is up on this big hill? And so they picked it as a place where they all thought that they would be safe. So I just love all of that great stormy atmosphere, and now I know where it came from, because you lived through a hurricane. So next, I thought maybe we could talk about some of the characters a little bit. And so, as we mentioned, there's this whole cast of characters. It's a big family, but our main protagonist is Gia. She's a recently divorced mother with an almost teenager. He's a 12-year-old son, Ishan, and they have a really interesting relationship that I want to get into more a little bit later. But just to briefly touch on some of the other characters, there's also Seema, who is Gia's sister, who is the one who owns this beautiful luxury house on the hill where she's invited everyone to stay during the storm. And Gia and Seema have this very complicated relationship that I also want to talk about a little bit later. But there's an older generation of the family is also there. There's Grandma, she's Seema's mother-in-law. And they also have a very tense relationship, because Grandma is not shy about letting Seema know all the ways that she's not quite measuring up as a wife and a mother as far as Grandma is concerned. There's also Seema's husband, his brother, his wife, Seema's toddler. So there's this whole big family, and who really doesn't get along, and now they're trapped together in this house. And it makes for a lot of tension, which is wonderful in a thriller. So firstly, Nishita, I wanted to ask you, which character was your favorite character to write?
So for me, definitely, I had the most fun writing the character of Grandma because she has like no filters between her thoughts and her mouth. She pretty much says what she wants. And what she wants is for her daughter-in-law, Seema, to give her a grandson, not a granddaughter, a grandson. And she wants Seema to be this super traditional wife whose life should revolve around her husband. At the same time, Grandma wants everybody in the house to listen to her. So I think it's fascinating the way this character basically uses patriarchy to actually enforce matriarchy with her at the top of everything. Like she wants all the power. And to give some context, the reason Grandma is this way is because she spent a majority of her life in India, where the norms are a little bit different. So to give you an example, the divorce rates in India are one of the lowest in the whole world. Like they hover at around 1%. So compare that to the ones that we have here, right? That does not necessarily mean that the people are in happier marriages. That's a separate issue. But people tend to stay together, especially when there are kids involved. So for Grandma, someone like Gia, who's a single mom, that's like an abomination.
Yeah, I have to agree. Grandma is one of my favorite characters as well. She sees everything. She doesn't miss a thing. And you all out there will find out when you read this book, she has the best one-liners. She just has these like little sarcastic little digs that really make you sympathize with Seema. It makes me really glad that she is not my mother-in-law. So that's actually great that you were just talking about marriage, because I wanted to move to another element of the book, which is I would love to dig in a little bit more to the relationship between Seema, Gia's sister, and there's a lot of tension between them. They have quite a complex and complicated relationship, and a lot of that has to do with their marriages and kind of the differences in between them. And I think one of the things that really struck me as a reader reading this book is that there's this kind of duality in their relationship. You can see on the page that they really do care about each other, and there's a lot of love, but there's also a lot of things where they really don't quite see eye to eye. So can you talk a little bit about Gia and Seema and how they relate to each other in the book and how you approached writing about these sisters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Gia and Seema are at very different places in their lives. Gia is a single mom. She's struggling to do it all by herself. And she sees Seema, her married sister, who has a house, a husband, a kid, the so-called perfect life. And she's not necessarily jealous, but she just wishes that Seema was, more grateful for all the good things in her life. And then you have Seema, who on the surface has everything, but she's actually pretty unhappy in her marriage. She's tired of keeping up with her traditional husband's demands. But when she sees her sister struggling, it kind of reinforces the belief in her that it's better to stay in an unhappy marriage than to walk out on one. So this kind of creates a complicated dynamic between them. And there's like this undercurrent of resentment and misunderstandings between them. And it's funny, actually, in the earlier drafts, I had them as friends. But the feedback that I got was that this is too toxic of a friendship. Like I would not be friends with this person. So obviously I had to find a way for them to be forced to spend time together, even though they don't really like each other that much. So I ended up making them sisters.
I love that. And I think that really rings true, that they really do have that kind of toxic relationship that I don't think I would put up with in a friend. But when you have a sister, you're kind of stuck with her. So I also wanted to circle back to one of the other characters we were talking about briefly earlier, which is Gia's 12-year-old son, Ishan. So when the book opens, we see that Gia has recently become a single parent because she's just gone through a divorce. And as part of the divorce, she's won full custody of Ishan. And so now we see her sort of struggling to suddenly have to take on the whole responsibility of parenting now all by herself. And then shortly after the book begins, she finds out that her ex-husband has put in a petition to try to get custody of Ashan back. And so now she's going to have to go through this whole process of basically having to prove that she's a good mother. She's going to have to get character references, and they'll be coming to interview various people in Ashan's life. And there'll be all of these external people coming in and observing her and judging her as a mother, which as a parent myself really made me empathize with Gia, because this sounds like truly my worst nightmare. So Nishita, can you talk a little bit about how you approached writing about Gia's parenting and her relationship with Ashan, and also why it was important to you to write about single parenting in particular?
Mhm. So some of my closest friends are single moms, and honestly, they are like personal heroes to me, because I've witnessed firsthand the sheer amount of hard work it takes to raise a child by yourself, especially in the Indian community, which is so family centric that for a single mom, it adds this layer of judgment and isolation on top of what is already a very difficult task. Like, I think the phrase single parent is so unfair and almost cruel because it has the word pair right in it. It's a two-person job. Sometimes I think for kids like mine, even two people are not enough, but definitely it's hard for one person to do it all alone. So I wanted my main character to kind of reflect that struggle. And when I started writing this story, I was not a mom myself. So I was using my observations to create Gia's character. By the time I sold you this novel, my baby was around 4 months old. And now my toddler is almost 18 months old. So that tells you how long I've been working on this story. But also the experience of motherhood, it just made me appreciate single moms even more, because I have a wonderful husband helping me out. I have the best in-laws in the world. Shout out to the 3 of them who are dealing with my toddler right now, which is why I'm able to do this. But even with all this help at hand, I find myself complaining all the time. So it made me respect Gia as a character even more. And as I was working through edits with you, I would often get up at like 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning, trying to get some words in before my baby wakes up. So I think that enabled me to better capture the exhaustion and the tiredness that Gia felt, because I felt tired most of the time. And it made me, better write the guilt that Gia feels, because are you even a mom if you don't feel guilty every now and then? So, and
We all feel you.
right.
Yeah,
All the moms and all the parents in the
Yep.
house, I see you.
Yeah, and a hurricane thriller is something everyone needs to read. We've been through them. So congratulations to you both, and thank you. Without further ado, we'll bring on our final 2 guests. And I was reading Holiday Country, I guess a few days ago after the publisher sent it to me. It's atmospheric, it's hypnotic. It is it's really, really good. And I've never been to Istanbul, but I've wanted to go, and now I really want to experience that. And the other thing is that it's got that summer vibe. So anyway, I'll introduce Inci Atrek, who holds a BA in English and creative writing from Wellesley. This is, of course, her first novel. And her editor, her very talented editor, Kukuwa Aishun, who is a progeny of Ghanaian immigrants and holds a BA in creative writing from SUNY Purchase and an MFA in fiction from NYU. But now she works at Flatiron, which is a division of Macmillan, and is the publisher of this wonderful book. So would you join us? And we apologize for the lateness of the hour. I hope our audience will hang in there for what is going to no doubt be another wonderful conversation. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Lee. And so thank you to everyone for joining us. And we're just going to jump right in. Inji, I'd love for you to talk to us about Holiday Country, and without giving us up too much, what is this book about?
So Holiday Country is Ada's coming of age story. Ada is a young woman who grew up and lives in California, but every summer she goes to Turkey with her Turkish mother to her grandmother's villa in this little seaside town called Ayvalık. And she absolutely loves it there. She has her own friends. It's a very small town. And one summer when she's 19 by the beach, she runs into this older man who happens to be a man from her mother's past. Her mother's past has always had this like mystery and allure for Ada. She's always wondering, who was my mother when she was in her native country? Was she maybe someone more powerful, more confident? So she actually tries to set her mom up with this man and thinks, okay, maybe if we move to Turkey, she will thrive again and I can finally really belong in this country that I love so much. But as things progress, Ada starts to realize that her mother might not be the right woman for this man. And in fact, perhaps the right woman for this man might be her. So the story explores a lot about identity, belonging. There's a lot about fate in there and destiny. So is fate something that's passed down from generation to generation, mother to daughter? If yes, how do you stop that? So we're with Ada from the beginning to the end as she navigates these questions while in the throes of this his scandalous romantic obsession.
I love that. And what I love the most about Holiday Country is how immersive it is from the very beginning. Like the point of no return for Ada is on the first page when she meets this mysterious man. So tell us where the idea for this book came from and why you chose for readers to journey to Ayvalık for your debut novel.
Yeah, so I have a lot in common with Ada. I'm also Turkish Californian. And because of this hyphenated identity is something I think about all the time. And one thing that was bothering me a lot a couple of years ago, before I started this book, actually, so several years ago, was what box do you have to check to really belong to a place? Because once you belong to a place, your love for that place is, it can be externally acceptable. So we all know those people who maybe go to a European city for a couple of days and they're just so smitten and they love it so much. And they say like, oh, I want to move here. Life is so great. And then the locals kind of look at them and say like, you don't know anything about this place. You just came here for a couple of days on vacation. You've barely scratched the surface. Therefore, your love is completely invalid. So I thought, okay, but once you belong, then when you say you love a place, that will be like received as true. So I thought, okay, what do you need to do to belong? I thought maybe when you speak the language really fluently, you have a great command over the language. Maybe it's when you understand the political and cultural nuances of a place, when you live and work there full time, so you really get the pulse of the daily life. Or perhaps most interestingly, it happens when someone who's very steeped into that culture and country looks at you, sees something worthwhile in you, and falls in love with you. So I really like this last hypothesis, and I set Ada out on a journey to answer that question for me. As for Ayvalık, I love Ayvalık. It's my favorite place in the world. I spent my summers growing up there. And there's a lot about a small summer town setting and that tight-knit community that helps Ada along in her journey. So for one thing, she's a swimmer. She's on swim team back in California, and she's extremely comfortable in the sea. The town also, I mean, it's very small. It has like 4 or 5 places that you could possibly be. So it's easily conquerable. And there's a really different pace of life in a place like this. So it really allowed me to play a bit with time, and time is really central to the novel.
And so you're actually based in Istanbul, but you grew up in California among a vibrant Turkish community. So can you speak more about how, important it was for a community to show up in these pages and the overall importance of community for a young woman like Ada?
Yeah, I personally love my Turkish Californian community. But so for Ada, she has 2 communities. This Bay Area Turkish American community that she grew up in, she knows, and then her very tight-knit summer community that she returns to every summer. So in the beginning of the book, you slowly start to see Ada kind of distancing herself from this Bay Area Turkish American community, because she kind of looks at them and sees people who are neither here nor there. They're cut off from the country that shaped them. all their celebrations are like laced very heavy with nostalgia and yearning. And she sees it a little bit as a threat to her own identity. She wants to be somewhere and just fully belong. When she goes to her summer town, she has her group of friends that she loves. And because it's summer vacation, they're always together, very close, but you can still tell that she considers herself an outsider for a lot of the time. And another really important thing about this community is, first of all, the villas have multiple generations in them. So it's like grandmothers, grandfathers, parents, kids, and everyone is constantly running into each other, and they know each other. So they see each other all the time. And what that means is that everything you do is definitely seen, heard, and talked about. And your actions not only reflect on you, they reflect on your whole family. And so that really raises the stakes for any bad decisions that I wanted my characters to make.
Absolutely. And it's just so exciting to see this coming about. And the reception for Holiday Country has been absolutely extraordinary across the board. I'm talking like from in-house support, you know, with the sales team, the hardworking folks at production, my other colleagues, to readers who've supported this book really early, including like Xochitl Gonzalez, author of Olga Dies Dreaming, called Holiday Country Mesmerizing. Raven Leilani, author of Luster, says Holiday Country is a gorgeous exploration of the wonder and potency of girlhood. And this is just to name a few. So my question for you is, who is Holiday Country for, and what are some books you see Holiday Country in conversation with?
So I'll start with the second question first. In terms of that kind of multicultural exploration angle, I love Duri Aziz Amna's American Fever, about a Pakistani student who goes to rural Oregon for a cultural exchange. Of course, Mina Seçkin's The Four Humors, about a Turkish American girl who also goes to see her grandmother, but in Istanbul. For that kind of complicated mother-daughter tension, also set in a little seaside town, Deborah Levy's Hot Milk. And then for that kind of sense of adventure and freedom and joy and that special summer community, Andre Asimon's Call Me By Your Name. So as for who Holiday Country is for, first and foremost, it's really a story for anyone who has fallen in love with a place, whether that place is their hometown and they know it like the back of their hand, or just, you know, being in a city or place for 2 or 3 days and just this inexplicable love that they feel. It's for third culture kids, so people who go back maybe on their summer vacations or Christmas vacations with their parents to where their parents grew up and see their parents in a different light and maybe think, wow, I wonder what mom and dad were when they were growing up here and how they changed when they were, you know, displaced or moved to a foreign country. And then it's also for people who are just interested in kind of these intergenerational stories, especially the kind of complications of mother-daughter dynamics.
Absolutely. And all of those are super relatable. And I do believe we have time for just one more question. So I do want to end off by asking, like, what is one thing you hope that readers take away from this story?
Okay, I have 3 really important things I want to talk about. I'll be very quick. So I really, really want anyone who's ever loved a place for either, you know, reasonable reasons or inexplicable reasons or unreasonable reasons to really feel seen and understood and know that their love is valid. And for those who haven't yet had that experience, just it would be such an honor if Holiday Country were really able to express that complicated and beautiful emotion that a relationship like that has. Separately, I mean, the book takes place in Turkey, and it's a really gorgeous, beautiful part of Turkey. And I hope it opens people's eyes to just a different aspect of that country that they might not have seen or known about before, and motivates them to kind of seek out, you know, more books, more literature about places that they don't really know that much about, and know that there's so many more different angles, and just get a better understanding of places and lives that aren't theirs. And lastly, I just really want people to have a good time. I think stories should be fun and engaging. And of course, I want people to, you know, consider a different perspective as they're reading, or put the kind of thoughts and philosophies they have on identity and belonging on trial, and really rethink them. But I also want every second they spend with Ada to be a lot of fun for them.
That's incredible. This is definitely a fun and engaging work, a really profound debut. So I'm excited for everyone to get their hands on Holiday Country, which comes out at the top of next year. So Inci, congratulations to you on this phenomenal debut and for bringing readers to Turkey for a few months. And Lee, I'll turn it over back to you.
Wow. Yeah, I love this book, and congratulations to you both. You know, and I was thinking as you were talking, and as everyone has been talking, you know, what a gift it is to have that rapport between editor and author, you know, and what hard work editors do. You know, we love authors are our rock stars, etc., but editors do this amazing work of connecting with authors and going over their manuscripts, every word, every sentence, over and over and over again in some cases. So thank you to all of the authors and all of the editors. And could you please rejoin us if you're still here? Turn on your audio and video so we can say goodnight to the audience. It's been such a pleasure. And I want to remind you to, well, you know, just go to Publishers Lunch and download, you know, go to the link and look at all the Buzz books, because there's a great assemblage of them. Does anyone want to add anything or say goodnight in a particular way? Is anybody already eating, or have you eaten? Or, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do for dinner now. Nobody?
I'm going to go have some ice cream.
Good deal, John.
I just want to say, Lee, thank you so much for moderating. You did a wonderful job, and thanks for having
It's
all of us.
such a pleasure, such a joy. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and good luck.
Thank
It's going
you.
to be a journey. And we're all excited to see readers connect with your books. Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Night.
Bye.
Da, 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 da.